I have to say, it's so invigorating to be in this room. There's so many new faces, familiar faces, people building ideas, new projects, fractions forming. I think this year there's so much more energy and excitement, even than last year. And I think last year we did a lot of why. Why are we doing all of this? You know, why? Where is this all going? And this year I'm hearing more how. What are the nitty-gritty details and implementations that we need to figure out? And I'm a UX designer, so I'm looking at the how from a UX perspective. And so today I want to talk about the UX of Local First, lessons from the field. And let me start by saying Local First really promises awesome UX. I think this is why we're all here, right? I mean, you're going to get performant applications. Things are going to be super snappy. There's no latency. You have so much more control. And with that, possibly, privacy from big tech. I think there's a lot to be said. And, if you want to look it up, read the 2019 paper, right? Like offline resilience, ownership and longevity. Those are all things that are going to make a huge impact on the user side of things. And all these things, as Martin said yesterday, will empower users. And that's the thing we're all building toward. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about what's not working, and where are the Baustellen, as the Germans would say, the construction sites, right? Like, where are the places where we still need a lot of work? Because the tech has matured over the last couple of years, but the UX hasn't. And so that's sort of all the things I want to be looking at today are Local First UX challenges. Yesterday, the word UX was mentioned a lot. Of course, we were also listening to a lot of sync engine talks, so the UX there was mostly about spinners, right? That's bad UX. I think that's right, but I think that's only a fraction of the story. Like, the problems with UX and Local First cover a bunch of ground, and I want to talk about 4 themes today. Before I do, why am I doing this? Who am I? Where do I come from? Well, I've been exploring Local First prototypes for a couple years now. I worked on this Local First collaborative editor called Upwelling at Ink and Switch. I also built a fun prototype called Fullscreen, which is a collaborative whiteboard using YJS with TLDraw. It's really just thought experiments, and the point of those experiments were not about building applications and shipping them. It's about deciding what are straightforward UX decisions you can make in your new Local First world, but what are the hard problems that we haven't yet solved and really need to be working on. I am also the instigator of an open UX pattern library called Decent Patterns. This is mostly in the bigger realm of decentralized technologies, but really thinking about what are generalized problems and what are generalized solutions that we can document. Before I dive into the details, I want to just echo what Chad was saying there for a second. This is an idea from Thomas Kuhn, who's mostly wrote about scientific revolutions, but I think this quote really applies to UX as well. What a man's... It's from a time when I guess there were different norms about gendered language. What a man sees depends both upon what he looks at and also upon what his previous visual conceptual experience has taught him to see. Local First really introduces a paradigm shift, right? Thomas Kuhn is talking about paradigm shifts. We are in the middle of a paradigm shift. Users don't approach software as blank slates anymore. They really bring mental models shaped by decades of cloud-first, server-centered paradigms, like saving to the cloud, syncing across devices, or logging in to access data. When we introduce Local First principles, where data lives on the device, syncing is eventual, and collaboration happens peer-to-peer, we're not just tweaking an interface. We're asking users to see the software and the relationship to it through an entirely new lens. And that's why the real UX challenge is helping users unlearn those old assumptions and build new intuitions about where their data is, how it moves, and what the software can do without a central server. So in a way, like, designing for Local First is less about user interface, and it's more about conceptual interface. You're really introducing new ideas, new mental models here. I'd like to think about as ideal solutions versus transitional solutions. I mean, Seth was also just talking about this for a little bit. Like, you really want to build sort of these intermediary stages. Like, what are you going to do to help your first batch of users understand this technology and be able to use it confidently. So there's some ideal solutions that I'll present, but a lot of the solutions today I'll show are just transitional, like little fixes to nudge the people in the right direction. Of course, we all know the adoption curve, and we know that we're at the very beginning here, right? Some UX issues will disappear as the adoption grows and mental models adjust to new paradigms, but it might never happen. It might never happen if users are scared or confused to even use your tech in the first place. So this is what I'm here to try to prevent. Okay, let's start. Communicating offline capability. You want to show people that your thing is working offline. How do you do it, barring actually onboarding everyone on an airplane? Well, let me tell you, not in a web browser. There's nothing that screams more internet than a web browser. People don't understand. Like, even if you're demoing, you have to turn off your little Wi-Fi thing, right? You don't show people that it's working offline by putting it in a web browser. Now, of course, the ideal solution here is, oh, maybe we can have browser-wide indicators. Maybe we can show offlineness and offlineness on that level. Maybe we even need our own local first browser, right? And don't call it a browser. I'm not sure, but basically there needs to be a container that actually gives people the idea that, oh, this is a safe offline space, and no, this is not a thing where all of my Google data lives, and also my local data. The transitional solution we had for full screen was just providing a native app. Very straightforward. We wrapped the whole thing in Tari, I believe, and it was downloadable. And you can open it locally. Now, is that a good long-term solution? No, clearly not. People love the web browser. People love having browser apps. When we tested this, we also had a lot of other issues around people having managed devices, so devices that wouldn't actually give you access to any kind of app download, right? So this particular nonprofit worker was like, nice idea. I could never actually install it. So there we are. Data ownership is, of course, a huge benefit, and yet cloud computing has really introduced this sort of always available paradigm, and you have to fight it in your UX. People think keeping your data in the cloud means you will have access wherever you go. Of course, so long as you have internet access and can reasonably keep your access safe. But this is the sort of expectation people have around availability. So making it local first really means you probably have to have some kind of cloud backup. But it gets worse. Because of this cloud-first ecosystem, local storage is really presented as the exception rather than the rule. Think about the context in which you are thinking about local storage. When I store a file on my phone, the default directory is always going to be on the cloud. I have to manually navigate to say, I want to have this on my phone. Google Docs has offline availability. You have to do it for every single document. You have to say, make available offline. When I want to go on a long car trip and I download my apps, my podcast episodes, manually download it down. I have a download indicator. It's never the default. It's always the exception. So that's the ecosystem you have to build into. So for full screen, what we did was we really relied on files. Files are here to save us all. We have a lot of file system language. You can see that, file, open, new, save a copy. And so with the native app and downloads, we really created a pretty strong and pretty stable idea of this thing being able to work locally. Downloads really, really communicate. These things are mine to have and to hold, right? Another item that tested really well was a toast at the end of a collaborative session. So you can see here, we really just after that session in the browser, we had this little note saying, keep your work. Save an editable copy of the board. Download. It couldn't be more explicit than that, right? But it really taught people, okay, this is the way you save this, and this is how it feels safe to people. Files, of course, serve two things. One is ownership, and the other one is the association with an app. So we used file extensions here to indicate that full screen really is local. You can see we have a little .full screen file extension here. That worked really, really well. Now, synced files. What are synced files? Synced files are files that are connected, right? You have a file, and then you share it with someone else, and then they open it. All of a sudden, their changes get synced to your file. Spooky action at a distance. People didn't like it. Okay. Another problem I see, file systems. Most users are unlearning how to use them. This is something that, in our generation, we'll see, mostly Gen Z, Gen Alpha, people are so used to application silos that they don't know basic file operations anymore. This is coming from a lot of research. Question is, do you want to double down on the file system, or do you want to move someplace completely different? This is one thing that happened to us in a test. We worked beautifully locally on a machine, had a file and had an app, and then we switched a device, and then the person says, wait, I don't have my login information. Not realizing that the whole time they didn't have to log in, which is a super great benefit, right? And yet, oh, I don't have my login information. How do I deal with this, right? So giving people maybe even a fake login information, just helping them understand that they can be fluid, I think that's something that is worth thinking about. Now, is ownership always desirable? I think that's worth asking too. It's not just in the case where you have a file size of 500 gigs that you probably don't want people to download everything. I think there is also something to be said about, having control overall. Anyone who's run an open source project knows this. With a lot more control, you have a lot more responsibility. So what does it mean to be shifting that responsibility for data backups, long-term preservation, as well as basic security guarantees to the user? Right? We often advertise the added privacy benefits, but not having a big tech company look after your data means that you need to take care of the maintenance. This is an anecdote from a recent study. I had asked people to distribute account recovery to a number of peers, sort of like in a Shamir secret sharing kind of way. All participants were super happy to designate peers. They have a whole little shard of information. They were like, oh yeah, my friend and my family member would totally do this. But then when I flipped the test and I said, hey, are you happy to be taken on your friend and your family member's little shard of information? People were skeptical. Some of them refused. They were like, I don't know. This is my clean-up version of the quote. The actual quote was, nah, I don't want that shit on my phone. So the question is, do you actually want this, right? You're building a world all of a sudden where people are going to put things in that synced file, not realizing perhaps that other people have access to it. So, it's maybe passwords, passcodes, your diary, your financial information. You think it's great, and all of a sudden, you share it with one person, and that person shares that file with someone else, and before you know it, it's public information. So really thinking about how those things, how you safeguard users and threat model in these particular situations, I think is great. Of course, here's your general reminder that local first does not imply local only. It is smart to do a cloud copy. It is smart to have a big peer. And it is also smart to do some basic end-to-end encryption, whatever you're building. Next, I want to talk about sync states. Sync states are hard. I think they're hard even in a non-local first scenario. This is Dropbox. Those are the 6 icons, I believe, that every file you could have on, I think the feature is called Smart Sync. But basically, those are the different, and don't ask me what the 6, I don't know. I don't think users know. Basically, there are different ways of indicating where this file might be located and what the behavior might be. So that's Dropbox. What's local first? Well, local first introduces the additional problem that we hop online, hop offline, we make changes, everything feels really fluid until you sync back and you have multiple versions of the document floating about. How do you signal which version is the primary one, right? You need to send a social signal to make sure you know the latest agreed upon version. It's not just the latest and timestamp, it's the latest agreed upon version. So in Git terms, you just really don't know where head is, right? maybe that's somewhat mitigated by the fact if you do have a cloud copy, but then that cloud copy has to be authoritative, and that comes with certain trade-offs too, right? But there is a coordination problem here, and so sync states, it's much more than just, are you online or offline, but it's about, what is the social kind of signal of syncing and merging. In terms of sync states, I think there are two general strategies. One is going super explicit, and the other one is being non-intrusive. The super explicit version is sort of being very clear about like pushing and pulling. This was sent, and this was actually received, right? A filled dot means it's a synced version, and if it's not filled, you'd say it's not synced, but then you give an indicator to the freshness of the data. So you say, well, it's last synced 3 days ago. You can even be more intrusive and say, well, I know you're writing, I know you're having fun here, but I have just detected multiple versions, and please, would you just review, because otherwise this is going to end in tears. So that's the kind of, very super explicit way of doing user experience. And on the other hand, you have, non-intrusive things like just doing a background sync, automatic updates, maybe even a last write wins. Who cares? YOLO. Version history, replaying all actions when you come back. Much more playful. And people say, well, clearly, that's the single-player situation and that's the multiplayer situation. I think no. I think it's way more complex than that. I think you have so many different scenarios that you're building for. If you're building a cute little, what did we see yesterday? They're like balls floating midair in a container, and we're going to add different things to make it cooler and floatier. Like that, I don't need to have, very, very firm controls there, I think. Financial reporting of this quarter, I better have very, very firm controls, right? Like those contexts really shift these different needs, and you have to make a decision here. And in my experience, you want to do either one or the other, and nothing in between. That usually also doesn't work. And as I was doing this, I realized that even the icons are in conflicts, right? They're competing here. I gave you the filled circle as sort of a presence indicator. I steal that from Slack, from XMPP, all the things that have online peers. So great, a filled circle is online, and if it's empty, it's you're not online. And then I was preparing this talk and going offline for a second, and all of a sudden my tab in Figma had a little filled dot, and what it means is they're unsynced changes. Well, that's something to agree on. I'm not saying the one is better than the other, but I'm saying you have to agree on things. Two different usage contexts for sure, but we better get this right from the start, because otherwise we're just going to confuse people. I also don't know about you, but when I see a dot like this, I get extremely nervous, and I think it's sort of the value proposition of local first that users should not have to feel nervous anymore when they have unsynced changes locally, right? So here we are. All right, next one, serious collaboration, as to perhaps frivolous collaboration. I'm not sure. Serious collaboration means you really want to agree on a thing at the end of it. So in that case, we know that even the best CRDTs, you have to have some sort of manual intervention. I'm not going to go into details here. You can read the Upwelling paper about what kind of interesting conflicts you can have. But the point is you need manual intervention. And back in 2022, we were very hand-wavy about, maybe we can just, eventually implement an AI and then have all those things automatically resolve. Well, guess what? You're just pushing the problem one level up, right? Because now you have to have some sort of a flow to review the reviews of the AI, right? So you're not going to get around to having to review things. So basically, that kind of user interface you always need to do if you are doing serious collaboration. Now we're in the business of change management. Hey, so how do we track changes? How do we show them without any visual clutter? How to group changes? Do we group them meaningfully? Do we group them automatically? How to propose the changes? Are all proposals suggestions, or are they actual, like firm commands? How to accept or reject a change? How to amend a change, right, before it's merged? All of these things, I'm sure everybody in this room says, well, that's just Git, right? That's really just Git. Git does it beautifully. And Git is a really strong model. And you're all right. Like, it doesn't actually have any other implementation outside of code yet. But I also want to say Git is just one of the ways that you can do version control. This is a screen grab from a very old piece of paper from the 60s from the State Department in Germany, I think. And you can see sort of different colored signatures on that. And that's just different levels of managers. Like the last one was, I guess, the Secretary of State who signed off on whatever that is. But the point is you have different ways of signaling socially how you're collaborating and how you do version control. And Git is a very, very powerful tool. It gives you a lot of control, but sometimes that's not required, and you don't have to have your user actually learn the whole power of Git. I'm going to skip track changes. You all understand track changes is really hideous, so you have to make that right. I want to talk about introducing version control concepts, and maybe this is one of the rare moments where we actually get to design something that is ideal, something that is new and exciting. So what do you call the environment, the sort of place where you are experimenting, where you have what we call creative privacy, where you can play around without people interrupting you, where you can group changes, where you can have things sort of name your own version. We had this idea, an upwelling of making a stack. Like basically the document is just a stack, that's your version history, and then everything is sort of a layer that's on top of it. And then you're drafting different layers and you sort of merge them into the stack. That's one way to think about it. I'm not sure layers and stack is actually the user-facing terminology, but I think it's the sort of conceptual idea here. You see that idea being continued also in Patchwork. Patchwork uses branches and not so much layers, but sort of more visual layers. You can kind of see like a new branch is sort of a different layer on top of that. I know Peter wants to talk about Patchwork later on, so I'm going to stop here. But basically, there are different ways of thinking about these version control ideas, and this is where it's exciting for me. It's really rare, in fact, for a user experience designer to be able to do new things. I have a little bit more time, so I'm going to do a bonus round. Local first is not a user-facing term, right? Right? Can we agree on that? I mean, if I went down the street and I said, hey, we're making local first software, they're going to think like we went out to Brandenburg, the state around Berlin, and like plucked some software, hand-plucked some software from the tree. No, this is not what, it's not working. It's a way to talk about development, and that makes perfect sense. But you're not going to put that in, in your description of your app. So I don't have the solution here. I would say local first, offline first. Anything that's first is very development speak. Cloudless, cloud optional are also, more accurate, but the goal in communications is don't point to the thing that you're not building, right? Like why mention the cloud even at all? So I'm thinking offline available is a pretty good way of describing what some of the capabilities are. User-owned is also, value signaling, literally. So that's something that we could maybe move towards. And now I have a lot of time to dream. What's ideal anyway? What is an ideal user experience of local first software? I told you all to move out of the web browser. I think we should all move way more into the physical world. And what I'm thinking about is physicality is a wonderful marker of ownership, of control, of longevity, thinking about really like big solutions for connected local devices here. And I'm not using Star Trek in an ironic way. I'm using it completely unironically. Like, why are we not surrounded by pads yet? Why don't we have things that just connect immediately, that are like low cost, that are super simple, not just, why is everything in one little device that has to be in your pocket? It's such a centralization that we actually never asked for. It's easy, sure, but it's also very, very resource wasting, right? So where are the pads? Where are the like little cool things, maybe made from sustainable hardware? Like those are the things that I want to see powered by local first technologies. So here we are. We're all allowed to dream a little bit. Let me recap. The point of this talk is not to get you all out of a web browser. The point of this talk is to say, what are the things that we need to solve together first, together, because otherwise you're never going to see the first batch of users come here, right? Those are the things that need a consistent UX for people to understand what it is that we're on about here. And that's something that I would love to build with y'all together. Thank you.